Hello, in this video I'm going to be going over assignment 5A. In assignment 5A, you're going to learn how to use cross contours to show form. Now, first and foremost, cross contours are lines that cut across the forms that you're drawing, describing the topography and structure of what you're drawing. In this amazing sketch by the sculptor Henry Moore, you can see that he is left no doubt to what these forms look like, but that his lines are not outside edges, but lines that come and wrap across the form, curving up as the leg goes up, going straight down as the blanket gets taut, and scooping back across the second figure. You can get a sense of how the blanket is suspended between these figures and the moments of their internal structure. Henry Moore is an abstract sculptor and really very concerned with showing volume and form. So it's not surprising that he uses cross contours in his drawings. Cross contours are amazing because they not only allow the viewer to really study the form, but the artists themselves study the form. In these two studies by the artist Sarah Siblett, you see her really exploring the topography of a face. These drawings are very three-dimensional. There's no room for doubt as to exactly what the structure of this nose is. And as you look at this drawing, you can see the lines responding to every hump and down and up and down. These eyes are not symbols or stickers on a face, but really three-dimensional volumes. Take a moment to look at how cross contours work when looking at these drawings. Cross contours kind of act as if they're stripes, parallel stripes on the figure. And as we see these parallel stripes drawn on the form, they curve. And you can see that we're looking, they're affected by our point of view. So we are looking down at this figure here. And so the stripes are curving down, similar to looking down on the ellipses of our cups that we've been drawing. As the forms curve around, there are moments where the foreheads are more flat and then curve in a different direction. Notice how when the cross contour meets the outside contour, it continues to turn around, blending right in to that contour. These are fantastic examples of cross contours. You can see that down here in the neck, cross contours can get pretty confusing as they come over a flat shoulder, come down into the cavity of our neck, go over our sternometaclastoid muscle, then over our throat again. We're very familiar with seeing cross contours in our daily life. Cross contours are a way that most printing was done. And if you look at the money, the dollar bills in your pocket, you will notice that the face of the president will always be made up of cross contours, just like these curves, these cross contours in Harriet Tubman's face for the new $20 bill. As you look at this drawing or this image, at first you might think it's made up of shading or value, but that's not the way these things can be printed. They can't put big open areas of tone. So instead, they've built up that value, built up that shading using cross contours. In our drawing that we're going to be working on, we are going to be toning our paper gray, just like in this Albrecht Dürer drawing. In this drawing, he is using both white and black drawing material. So will we. We'll be working on paper that we tone with ink, and we'll be using our white Conte and our black charcoal pencils. You can see in this drawing by Albrecht Dürer that he is using white cross contour lines to make something feel close and black cross contour lines to make something go further away. And that is the same effect that we are going to be working on for our drawing. In this video, I have broken up our steps into 4 main steps. The step 1 is toning your paper. This will take a little setup time, but will go pretty quickly once you get going. The longest element of this is the drying time. We're going to be toning with our Indian ink, and so it needs some drying time. You can speed up the drying time with a hair dryer, but make sure you leave time for this to happen. You want to be spending 3 hours working on your drawing. This does not include setup time and toning time, toning your paper time, but mostly just includes the actual drawing. Step 2 will be setting up our still life. I'll go over how to set up our still life, but what you're going to need is some fabric and some simple objects, usually no more than 1 to 2 objects. We are going to be covering our objects with the fabric so that we create a uniform surface to draw. Step 3 is sketching out the forms, and I'll go over some simple ways to approach these complex forms. Step 4 is drawing out the contours. I'm going to spend 45 minutes to an hour working on the drawing. You are going to want to finish your drawing. I'm going to leave mine incomplete. This assignment should take you 3 hours of contour drawing time, so make sure you plan ahead. Contour drawing can be frustrating at first, so make sure you're not working up to a deadline, because that's a surefire way to find yourself getting really frustrated. All right, let's begin.
All right, let's look at some of the materials you're going to need to gather for this project. You're going to need for your setup some fabric. I'm using an old t-shirt, but you can use a pillowcase or any kind of fabric that doesn't have a pattern on it. We are not going to damage this fabric, so it can be something that you're currently in use. It is useful to choose something that is a medium value range, but it's not necessary. So anything that you have. I don't recommend picking something too dark. Something like a black fabric might be hard to see the lights and darks on it, but white, gray, and kind of any solid color will work. You're going to need an area a flat surface to set up your still life on. And then I'll go over how we're going to set up our still life, but you're going to need some simple objects. We're not going to do a very elaborate setup of objects, so I'm probably going to only use one of these, but these are the kinds of objects that I'm thinking of. Something that has a pretty easy to understand shape. Don't worry about surface detail and nuance, because we're going to actually cover these with the fabric. But here are some examples of some just simple objects that I have gathered. We're going to need our drawing quality paper. We are going to be toning our paper before we begin drawing in charcoal on it with our ink. So we're going to be diluting our ink down, but you're going to need your ink, your black Indian ink or waterproof ink, India ink. You're going to need a container that has a little bit of water on it to dilute your ink with. It's nice to have a separate container also for washing your brushes in, but you can also do that in the sink. I'm just using any kind of container. In our kit, we have our foam brush. This is what we're going to be using to create an even surface. I don't recommend using your bamboo brush for this, but just any cheap flat brush will work. When it comes to prepping our paper before we lay our ink on, we're going to use our masking tape. We'll create a border, and if you want to use your ruler to make a perfect border, you can use that. Once we start our drawing, we're going to be using our charcoal pencils. You can see I have the one with a stork tip, which will go dull really quickly and has not a great point to it. And then I have one that I have sharpened using my sanding paddle and an X-Acto knife. So have those nearby. It's always nice to have your kneaded eraser out to make small adjustments. And we're also going to be using our white Conte. So these will be our 2 primary drawing materials. All right, let's get started. The first step in this project is to tone our paper. When I'm using the term toning our paper, what I mean by that is I'm going to be turning this white piece of paper into a gray piece of paper. In other words, I'm going to be adding tone or value to it. The material I'm going to be using to tone my paper is our ink. So I'm going to be diluting this ink. It's jet black in the bottle, very, very strong. And so I'm going to be mixing just a tiny bit of ink to my water. And then I'm going to be painting an even coat onto my paper. I'm going to let that dry while I set up my still life. And then once it's fully dry, I'm going to draw on it. So we are not going to be drawing with our ink this week, just using it as a base color. I find it's really nice to start off by creating a border with your masking tape. This will give you a nice clean edge, and it'll make it really clear what is in your composition and what is outside of your composition. So begin by creating a border with tape. Now, you don't want your tape to tear your paper when you remove it, so you're not going to leave this tape on forever. And so in order to do that, in order to prevent it from tearing your paper, it's just useful to take the tape, and either put it on your skin or put it on some fabric. The oil from your skin will just reduce the tack enough so that it won't tear the paper off. You still want to be careful and only remove tape when the image is completely dry, but it should help. So let's create a nice even border, go all the way up to the edge. All right, now that my border's taped down, I'm ready to mix my ink. I have a dish of water, just regular tap water. This dish is full about kind of a half an inch. This is way more than enough ink to coat this surface. I could probably use even like half of this and that would be fine. You can use any kind of container. I like containers that are wide enough to get my brush in, so I'm using a tofu container, but cat food containers, yogurt containers, all work fantastically. So ink is very, very strong. And so when you're mixing ink, the key is to do lots of tests and make sure you don't add too much, because you don't want to have to dump a bunch of water in there and waste your ink. So this comes with an eyedropper. So I'm going to squeeze it, and I think one, we'll have to test, but I think one would be a good place to start. So you can see that was one eyedropper full of ink, and it's already pretty dark. Okay, so I think that that's going to work out pretty well. Now, I want something that is not so dark that when I draw with my charcoal pencil, I can't see it, but not so light that when I draw with my white Conte, I can't see it. So think medium value range. If you're looking around your house for something that's about the value, not the color, but the value you're shooting for, your brown paper grocery bags or a cardboard box, that value brown is about what you're going for. So you can see for this container, half-inch full, pretty large container, you know, a 4x5 tofu container, just one drop, one squeeze worked. So if you've got like kind of a small yogurt container or a small cat food container, you're going to want to be putting like one drop in. Think of it as being more like food coloring than like paint. It's very, very concentrated. So you're thinking 1 or 2 drops. And if it turns out it's too light, you can always add more. But this is looking pretty good to me. So I'm going to fill my brush up, and this can be really messy. So I've got some paper towels, and I've got some paper towels on standby. And our goal is to get kind of an even tone and not see a lot of brush strokes. And so what you'll notice happens is, yes, the paper will warp. That's pretty normal. It will flatten out a little bit when it dries, but you know, it might stay pretty bubbly at first, and sometimes it's good to tone your paper the day before and then let it dry and then close your book back up and press it down if it gets too warped. But one of the things you'll notice is it bowed and then it formed what we called a bead. Even when it's flat, the ink will gather along an edge. Now, if that edge is left to dry as an edge, it'll make a very sharp line. But if you take that bead and while it's still wet, and it's like called a bead of ink, drag it along, you can get a pretty even tone. So let's look at that. I'm going to take this board, my sketchbook, and I'm just going to take one of my little objects, and I'm going to stick it underneath so that it's just at a slight angle. It's not super angled, it's just up a little bit. So we're talking, you know, 3 or 4 degrees. And I'm going to start at the top. And I'm going to work quick, and gravity is going to pull that ink down. And you notice I'm dipping after every time. You don't want to go over it too many times because going over it again will darken it. But we want to pull that bead, we want to use gravity to pull the ink down, and then we want to continue to pull it down further. Okay, if you feel like you didn't, if it's a little stripy, it's exaggerating its stripiness on the screen, it looks like. But if you're feeling like once you've gone your pass and it's too stripy, you can alternate it this way. Sometimes it's nice to have a little bit stiffer board underneath, but this is working. This video is not sped up. This is how fast I'm working. So I'm really trying to go pretty quickly and bring it down. And then we'll let it dry. And depending upon how cold it is or how wet it is outside, this could take, you know, about an hour to dry. You can speed up the drying time with a hair dryer, but if you have any puddles, let those kind of dry out a little bit before you run a hair dryer over it. So if you're on a time crunch and you want to get it dry, it's great to just, you know, a hair dryer will go really, really quick. But make sure that there aren't any pools. Now, if you're worried that it's not even, you can even squeeze out all the ink and go back over it one more time. You don't want to scrub it too much. This is okay paper that we're using here. I think it's pretty high quality paper, but it will get damaged if you go over it too many times. Okay. So I'm just kind of evening it out with a brush that is, you know, dry to the touch. I've also then pulled out, kind of using it like as a sponge, and pulled out all my little pools and puddles of ink. And by doing that, I've allowed it will dry quicker. If you dab it with your paper towels, you'll leave a texture on your ink wash, and you don't want to do that. Now, as soon as you're done with your brush, you're going to want to wash this in your sink with just regular water. It should wash out pretty easily. We are going to need this for another project, so don't throw it out. Please wash it out. Your ink can go right down your sink. You can also put it in your garden. It's totally safe, so you can dump it out in your yard. Don't put it on your concrete because it will stain. This is waterproof, so if it gets on your clothes or your rugs, or even on wood, it will stain and you won't be able to wash this out. So I'm working on just a folding table that you can see there's other ink on this, so I'm not too worried. But if you're worried, then put some paper down or work on a tarp or work on a towel so that you don't spill your ink out. All right, I'm gonna go clean my brush and dump out the remainder of my ink, and then we'll start setting up our still life. All right, while I'm waiting for my paper to dry, I'm gonna get started on my setup. So for this setup, you're gonna take one or two kind of simple objects and simple forms, and you're going to arrange them underneath your fabric. So let's get started with this. I'm gonna start off with just seeing what this bowl and berry container look like. And I'm gonna take my t-shirt, my old kind of junk gray t-shirt, and I'm gonna create a setup where I don't want it super complicated, because if there's a wrinkle in my composition, I want to draw it. So I want it to kind of cling to and show the forms, and I want to even out some of these wrinkles. Now, my lighting overhead is pretty even. I have a fluorescent lights overhead, so I'm going to reach over and turn on a clamp light that I have at the side. Now, when I'm drawing, it's not that I'm going to draw all of these lights and darks, but these lights and darks, light where the light is, dark where the form turns away, help me see the form. So it just allows me to see things just a little better. And it'll give me kind of a clue as to what the form looks like. Okay, that's kind of nice. I like where that's going. So I have something kind of round. I might, since I'm going to be drawing it, I kind of wanted something a little bit more kind of simpler. So let's go just this can. Now, when it comes to showing this can, see how I've put it underneath, but I want to be able to see the form a little bit better. So I'm going to tuck it in on one side so that the fabric goes completely on the form. I'm going to come down one side. And I'm trying to, yes, I want to have these wrinkles, but I don't want to have hundreds of them. So don't choose a fabric that is really wrinkly. Choose something like this t-shirt, like a heavy piece of cotton that you can kind of shape the wrinkles. And I'm not putting it in the thick one layer of cotton. I'm using the shirt as a whole because the thicker cotton will cause these wrinkles to be a little less wrinkly. So a towel will work really well because the towel is really thick and so its wrinkles are a little bit more even. So if you're a little nervous about all this detail that you have to draw, maybe choose to cover it with a towel. Okay, I kind of like that. I'm going to have it pulled on one side where it kind of forms like a tent, and then tight on another. And then I'm just going to keep playing with these wrinkles. Maybe kind of loose like that. All right, when I'm thinking about my composition, I'm not thinking of drawing all of this, but I'm going to zoom in on an area. If that seems a little confusing, you can even give yourself some kind of taped borders. Like, I want to be responsible for this. To about over here. Okay. This step is not that necessary, but I think it'll make it a little easier when I'm demoing for you. So I'm going to tuck it under, and I've created a pretty seemingly simple setup where I'm just looking at how this goes over. I am going to try to get every single one of these wrinkles that's within my border. Okay. If you are trying to think about composition, you know, maybe this will feel a little too centered. And so maybe I'll add another little thing down right here. So that's a little less centered. Okay, that's a little bit more dynamic of composition. All right, I have a couple layers. I have a level here where I have a flat tin, and then I come up. This is really extreme. This is more gradual. And then this goes up and in. And so I'm already thinking about how each of these curves kind of creates a different wave and has a different structure. All right, when my paper is fully dry, I'll be ready to start drawing.
All right, now that my paper is completely dry and I have a setup that I like, I'm ready to start drawing. So I'm gonna start sketching with my charcoal pencil. But before I start, it's very important to make sure that my paper is completely dry. If my paper is still damp, when I draw with it with my charcoal pencil, my charcoal will kind of turn to paint on the surface. It'll mix with the water and turn to a paint-like substance. That substance will not erase. Also, if it is not damp but still not fully dry, as I draw on it, I can damage the paper. Because the paper is a little bit softer and more easy to kind of break up and get scored and damaged when it's wet. So make sure your paper is completely dry. A good way to be able to tell that your paper is dry is it shouldn't be cold when you touch it. It should be the temperature, the ambient temperature of the room. I've used a hairdryer on this to really go over it and make sure it's bone dry. I did find that our Dr. P.H. Martin's ink dries a lot lighter than it ends up drying a lot lighter. And therefore, I did have to go over and add a second coat to my paper. So
I ended up, after it dried, it was so light that my white Conte wasn't really showing up very well. And so I decided I went over it with another layer. So you want it to be so dark that you can see your white really easily, but you also want to have it light enough that you can see your dark lines really clearly. This is just a chamois, wipes it right down. All right, so I'm ready to start drawing my setup. So it's a pretty abstract setup, and it can be really hard to figure out where to start. Now, when this drawing is finished, my entire paper will be covered with cross contours. It'll almost look like kind of like a topographical map, except instead of swirling out, it'll be lines that enter in and go up and down and up and down and undulate across this whole surface. But that's going to take a while to develop. So as we always do, you're going to be working general to specific. So before I start doing my cross contours, those are the lines that cut across the form, which I'll demo in great detail, I want to rough out, sketch out, gesture out the basic shapes. I'm going to be using my charcoal pencil to sketch out my basic forms, but you could use Vine for this step, your Vine charcoal. Keep in mind that if you use Vine charcoal, you really want to not put very much down. So you don't want to add a lot of material to your paper. The more charcoal that you have on the surface, it will mix with your white, and your white won't be as bright. So we want to put a little bit on, which is why I'm going to sketch with this. So I'm going to be doing this setup. Now my point of view is not directly above like the camera is, but I am sitting up pretty high. And it's okay to be looking at your still life from a slight angle, but you don't want to be looking at it from down here. So this isn't looking at this from a side. You do want to be kind of looking slightly up at a slightly above angle. So I'm going to loosely sketch out my forms. Now, when I am gesturing these forms, my goal is not to add a lot of detail, but to say, okay, this can looks just like a rectangle. My goal is to figure out how big I want to draw it on the paper and where I want to place it on the paper. So gesturing out the forms, its first goal is not a lot of detail or complexity, but to say, okay, how big do I want this to be on my piece of paper, and where do I want to put it on my piece of paper? So a very simple shape will suffice. So I'm just going to do kind of a loose rectangle. And at this stage, you can measure, but you can also kind of just look at negative shapes. So I look at a negative shape here, and I see that I have kind of another rectangle coming across. I see a negative shape here. Now for this drawing, because your forms have become pretty abstract, you're having the absolute perfect proportions down is not going to be super necessary for this project, because it's going to be pretty hard to see what the objects are, and so it's going to be hard to see if they're drawn the wrong proportions. That said, you should always kind of practice getting things the correct proportions. It's good practice for later drawings, so find a way to measure or to close one eye so that you're just looking at negative shapes, and practice sketching out the right proportions. Now for these wrinkles, I'm just doing a line, and I'm doing a line that kind of, I imagine, going down the top. So I'm doing a line down that captures these wrinkles. A little one right here, and then this comes down in through here. My tape kind of ends a little bit. This one comes in through here. And it can get overly complicated pretty quickly, but every time you add a new line, you get a chance to say, did I make this too big, or did I make this too small? If something doesn't fit, if a new wrinkle doesn't fit, then you can come back and check your proportions. So as I look at this shape, this ridge is probably a little bit more over in here, because that has to curve up to meet it. So as you add one element, like this wrinkle, you can look at how it connects with another form. And that can help you get your proportions. Rather than really doing a lot of proportional measuring, you can use looking at negative shapes, like what we did with our leaves, to help with that. And different people will find different ways more effective. Okay, I'm not really going to need much more than this to at least get started on my gesture drawings. You can see that this sketch is pretty abstract. It doesn't look representational in any way, and that's because my setup doesn't as well. So it's very simple shapes, it's just placement in lines, and it's pretty normal for our beginning sketch, our beginning gesture, to look pretty abstract and to not really look like anything except to the artists themselves. Okay, so you've put these marks down as a guide to you. They may not mean anything to the next person, and that's fine. Okay, I have a pretty sharp charcoal pencil. If I find there are areas that I went a little dark, I can either just kind of lightly hit them with my chamois, keeping in mind that your chamois will take off a lot, or loosely take it off with my kneaded eraser. Okay, so they're just like these ghost lines. All right, the next step is to begin adding our cross contours. Now, we are going to draw with two types of material. We are going to be using our charcoal, black charcoal, and our white Conte. We also have a third value, which is the color of our paper. Now, when we were drawing on our white piece of paper, a dark mark had high contrast and came forward, whereas a lighter mark receded back. Our paper is no longer white. The whole environment is gray. And so dark lines are no longer going to be the lines that come forward. Dark lines in this case are going to be the lines that go back. And it's going to be light lines that come forward. And this is going to get you starting to think about not only contrast, but how light hits a form and turns and creates shadows. So light lines are going to come forward, gray lines are going to be a middle ground, and dark lines are going to be receding, and they're going to be the lines that are furthest away from us. Okay, so it's going to be the opposite as here, where because the background was white, it was the dark lines that came forward. So it's all about what that background value is. I want you to approach this drawing as if this is a slab of clay. You're going to be using your Conte, your white, to add clay to build up, and you're going to be using your black to push into that surface. So imagine that you're sculpting a relief and that you're going to add with your white and subtract, push back with your black. And you're going to be using this through lines that move and cut across the form. So contour lines are lines that come in, and you can see I kind of sketched a few out here while I was doing a slightly, started my demo a couple times now. As these cross contours come, they come around, it's as if they come around, and when the form gets up, they curve up, and then as the form curves down, they curve down. So they're lines that cut across the form, almost looking like stripes. And the great thing about cross contours is they really tell the viewer what exactly is happening. Okay, they leave no doubt as to what the structure, the three-dimensional quality of this form is. And so they communicate a lot of information. And we want to get good at using cross contours and figuring out how they curve and how much they curve and how they go down, and do they curve this way or do they curve this way. So the purpose of this assignment is for you to practice figuring out which way you should curve your cross contours to show volume and which ways you should curve your cross contours to show something going back in space. Now this has to do with your point of view. As I'm looking at this, I'm looking at it from here. Okay, so I'm looking at the object from here. I'm looking down on it. And so the form is moving away from me. And so my cross contours should all curve this way when they're three-dimensional, and this way when they're going back in space. Okay, So my lines are all going to come across, and if they're on a flat surface, they're going to be straight. And then when they hit this can, they're going to go up and around, and then the can comes down, and then maybe it meets really flat, and so they'll start to go flat again. Okay. But if there is kind of like a wrinkle like this, it might be that the line comes up, it goes behind, picks back up again, maybe it dips in a little bit, and then maybe it comes up, does this wrinkle, and then goes down, curving backwards to capture, curving concaved to capture this slope. Then it would come up, hit this, come around this edge, come down, up, and it's coming back up through this wrinkle, over the top, and then back down. Up, and then another wrinkle, come up, and then finally across this flat surface. So you can see it's very complicated to capture it as it goes, but as I'm doing that, I'm really studying how this form goes up and down and up and down. So this is doing that line completely with black. This part is closer to me, so I would actually change that for being white. Then maybe black as it goes back, white as I want this to be a little bit closer. And then white here and white here. And you can see how those moments of white really do make it pop forward. Okay, that value change really makes it come forward. All right, things are erased really nicely on this surface. Part of it is that the surface already has a lot of color to it, has a lot of dark value to it. So it doesn't feel as weird to have these little marks. They're, you know, this little mark right here might, this pentamente might be really noticeable on a white piece of paper, but you know, on a gray piece of paper, it's not really that noticeable. So I do find that these pentamentes, these residue marks, these drawing marks that you want to, that were slightly off that you want to redo, they're not as noticeable. Okay, so they just don't have as high a contrast, so it can be really freeing to work on a toned surface. All right, now that we've got kind of what a contour is, let's get going. Now I'm going to kind of establish some of these shapes just so that I don't lose track of these lines. My charcoal pencil is already a little dull, so before I start my contour lines, I'm gonna cut it, I'm gonna sharpen it. Okay, it can be really hard to figure out where to start. Know that no matter where you start, you can always visit that area again later. So I find it takes us a while to warm up. So I imagine the area that I do first will be an area that once I've warmed up and made a plan and worked on this for, you know, an hour, I'll probably go back to that place. That said, I'm going to start off by start off by this top plane right here. So this is the area that's closest to me, so I know it's going to be in white conte. This area right here is the part that it's just starting to bend. The white conte erases really easily, and so I'm just going to start kind of figuring out what some of those contour lines could look like. Maybe they'll be placed out like that. So I'm not going to try to just draw them completely. I'm just going to kind of work on some, warm up a little bit. And form really curves. And I want you to know that I'm really looking at my can, looking for moments where the can does something weird. And my contours are getting a little wonky. That's okay. I can fix them afterwards. I don't need to be perfect right off the bat. Okay, if this comes down, as this continues to curve, I think it would be nice to start to bring in just a little of that. I'm going to start with them kind of spaced pretty evenly. I'll probably change that as I go. I'm going to imagine if this line were to continue to curve around it would probably come out, it's not going to come out right here. So I'm going to imagine it coming out right here. Can kind of use some visual license here. Okay. Now I have to decide how much of this I want to make white. It's a pretty big form. I'm going to look at how big this planar shift is here. And I'm going to make my white end right about here. And there's no reason I can't loosely sketch out where I want to bring my white to. And the way I determine that line is I can see a shadow where it goes from a highlight to a shadow edge. It's called a shadow core. And that change, I'm going to use the fact that the form obviously turned so much that it turned into shadow to pick up my line here. Now, from here over, it just goes right down to the bottom. I can see this line, it comes out. Because I'm looking at it from this point of view, it's not like this, I can see it. Oh, it bows up a little bit. It goes through. Okay, you can see I'm drawing really, really slow. You can also see that although I haven't put a lot of information down yet, and although it feels like it's still very, very much at the beginning, and I'm still really confused, and I definitely don't think my lines are exactly where I want them to be yet, already this paper doesn't feel flat anymore. And that's kind of the magic of cross contours, is that they instantly show volume. So even when we're being we're still struggling with them, and they're still in the really early developmental stage, this paper already starts to feel not like a flat piece of paper, but a three-dimensional form. And part of that is this added value of black, gray, and white. Really starts to tell the viewer how three-dimensional this is. And if you find you put the line and it kind of is not curving that well, the great thing about the white Conte is it erases easily. This doesn't hold a great tip, and so a thing that you can do is you can essentially sharpen this with your sandpaper. Okay, so we get down in here. This one continued to curve around, but by the time, when I'm looking at this, by the time we get to here, it goes down into a valley, comes back up, and it's hitting the side of that box, this edge right here. And then it's going to come out here. So I'm going to see the side of that box by the way this curves down in. Now, one of the hard things to have happen when you're doing your cross contours is not to have them kind of change direction, but to really have them come in, go over the form, come across, and go in through here. It's important to try to really get your cross contours to come from one side, respond to the form, and then exit. It's one of the reasons why we're draping this with fabric, so we can really think of it as one uniformed surface. But it can get tricky to figure out how this should respond. So when we get here, it feels like it would be natural. The angle of this box goes this way. And so it feels like it'd be natural to come across and then turn our lines this way, but we want to actually keep our lines this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. So running as parallel stripes. You just have to kind of stop and pause and remind yourself, where's my line coming from? Okay, so this is that. Here we get into some trickiness because there's another wrinkle. Great, it's good practice. So this is coming up, it's going. I'm gonna remind myself with the overall shape I'm going for, lighten it up. Here it kind of dips in, so I'm gonna capture that dip by being concaved. And then it comes through and it hits this ridge. It goes up. I'm gonna use the tip of that with my white Conte. So I'm gonna catch this whole top part of this ridge. I know the white Conte erases really easily, so I'm gonna go through and kind of place some of my lines because it kind of helps me remember what I'm doing. Sometimes I can see it, sometimes it goes straight down and I can't see it. Sometimes it's going a little bit more gradual, like a hill. If your spacing isn't perfectly even, that's fine. That's pretty normal. The spacing wouldn't be even because it would change. You know, this we're looking at really evenly. Here we're looking at it at a really extreme angle. So the spacing would get pretty strange. Okay, once again, trying to remember that I'm coming down, across and up. You can see putting a little highlight here for this ridge. Maybe all it needs to feel more three-dimensional. And things are there's gonna be moments where it gets wonky. We get these weird spaces. Just keep moving ahead and rework when you need to, re-erase when you need to. Okay, I've used these flat lines to get this flat top, but as soon as it gets here, it's gonna start getting round and more complicated. I'm going to use dark lines to denote something is far away. If you see something is off, just correct it. This stuff erases so easily. Or if you think your lines are a little messy, even if you do think that they're correct, erase them, resharpen your charcoal pencil, and make cleaner lines. You'll be more satisfied with your drawing if it has the line work you want. This area digs deep down, so I'm going to do concaved, concaved, concaved. And so I have an area where this ridge comes up comes to a point, and then we go deep down into this concaved area. So all of these lines should be curving down. They can curve back up as they hit a ridge. So, in other words, curve this way to go up, curve this way to go down. So concaved is going to bring you down. Convex is going to bring you up. So you want to think of yourself as going up and over, and then back down and concave, down and concave. You can see how complicated this gets so quickly. And that's okay. You can go back in with an eraser and erase out lines, not only with your kneaded eraser just to change the line weight, but with your click eraser to clean up an area or to really erase it fully. Once again, things will erase really nicely on your surface. Now, I have been drawing for 45 minutes on this, and you can see that I'm really just beginning this drawing. This drawing will take you 3 hours. That's just what it takes. So give it time. You want to cover the whole piece of paper with your cross contours. You want your cross contours to be both white as things come forward, dark as they go through. And you want to be working from a setup that has a piece of fabric over 1 to 2 objects. Keep it super simple. This object was just a soda can. This was just an Altoid box. So my objects were very, very simple. And even though they were simple, once I put the fabric over, they start to get these wrinkles. Remember that when I did my still life, I did kind of shape my wrinkles so that there weren't so many of them. Don't draw a fabric that's got lots of texture in it. It'll just drive you crazy. So keep it simple. Fill your drawing with your cross contours. And I recommend drawing your forms a little bit larger than life. It actually makes it easier because it allows you to really get in and draw these forms and not just get completely overwhelmed with the bluntness of your charcoal. This drawing can be frustrating for the first hour, but once you start getting stuff on the piece of paper, it really looks three-dimensional and it'll really start to come together. So be patient. Be patient. Don't hope to master this drawing in the first few minutes. You know, allow yourself to just be overwhelmed, be lost for a little while. That's okay. It will start to make sense if you just keep looking at it. I was pretty overwhelmed when I started, and I just knew that if I just kept looking at it and started putting lines down, I might not get everything just right. It might look pretty messy at first, but eventually it would start to kind of come together. All right, so you want your entire drawing covered with cross contours. Spend 3 hours working on this drawing. Leave time, 3 hours drawing, that doesn't include drying time for your paper. So it's a good idea to prep your paper like an hour beforehand so that it's fully dry. Happy drawing!